Hello, in this video, we cover the key points from Sergey Lavrov's statement following the SCO Foreign Ministers meeting in Tianjin. He talks about the future strategy of the SCO, the situation in Ukraine, relations with China and Iran, sanctions, and Russia's role in a changing multipolar world. If you're interested in international politics without the filters, subscribe to the channel and give this video a like.
Dear colleagues, good afternoon. We travel a lot with you. So we got to the final point of our tour, and it was the city of Tianjin, the place where the meeting of the website of the foreign ministers of the SCO member states had just taken place today. This was the final stage of preparation for the upcoming summit of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization here in Tianjin, at the end of August, beginning of September. We noted altogether a very businesslike, specific mood of our work. In this regard, we attach particular importance to the meeting held this morning with President of the People's Republic of China Xi Jinping, who shared his assessments of joint efforts under the Chinese presidency, and his vision of the main tasks for the progressive development of our organization. The discussion confirmed the common understanding of the increasing importance of the SCO members' combined potential in both regional and global affairs. Of course, there are nuances in national approaches. There is no other way, but nevertheless, the main trends towards further consolidation of the SCO and increasing its role in the international arena are encouraging. We have stated that our common line on strengthening the SCO as one of the supporting pillars of a more just multipolar world order remains unchanged. This fully takes into account the representative composition of the association's participants, which we observe today, and also see a large number of those who want to join the work of the Shanghai Organization. And the geographical area of our structure already covers a significant part of the Eurasian continent. We noted that cooperation within our organization objectively contributes to the creation of an architecture of equal and indivisible security throughout Eurasia, and we see its socio-economic foundation as a large Eurasian partnership based on cooperation. Multilateral associations operating in the region, such as the Shanghai Organization, first of all, the Eurasian Economic Union, the Commonwealth of Independent States, ASEAN. Of course, we take into account the One Belt, One Road project of the People's Republic of China, including the existing agreement between this project and the Eurasian Economic Union. And in the context of the approach we have outlined, we have confirmed our readiness to continue to closely coordinate our actions in the United Nations. We discussed the implementation of the proposals approved at last year's summit on improving the SCO's activities, the preparation of draft agreements on the establishment of a universal center for countering security challenges and threats in Tashkent, and an anti-drug center in Dushanbe is being finalized. It is planned to deploy a structure to combat organized crime in Bishkek. We spoke in favor of further expanding the interaction of the Shanghai Organization with external players. A new step in this direction will be the upcoming summit meeting in the SCO Plus format at the Tianjin Summit for the first time. This event will be held in conjunction with the meeting of the Council of Heads of State on the 1st of September. We expect about 30 states and multilateral associations to participate in this event. This is also an indicator of the growing attractiveness of the creative agenda of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization for the countries of the Global South, for the countries of the world majority. We spoke today specifically on topical international and regional issues, informed our friends in detail about the assessments of the latest developments in Ukrainian affairs, and confirmed our approaches to resolving the crisis around Ukraine, which President Putin has repeatedly stressed. Well, colleagues, in turn, perceive it with understanding. This was confirmed once again today. Our position on the need to eliminate the root causes of the conflict and recognize the existing territorial realities guarantee the legitimate rights of Russians and Russian speakers, including in the territory remaining under the control of the Kyiv regime. We indifferently condemned Israel's attacks on Iran's peaceful civilian facilities. Let me remind you that on June 14th, immediately after these aggressive actions, the SCO promptly issued a corresponding statement. Similarly, the United States strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities are also qualified as gross violations of the principles of the UN Charter and the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons. At the same time, we stressed the commitment of our countries to ensuring the right of Tehran, the legitimate right of Tehran, to the peaceful use of atomic energy. Regarding the situation in the Middle East, they stated that stabilization in the region is impossible without a just settlement of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict in full accordance with the decisions of the United Nations. And as an urgent step, everyone called for an immediate cessation of actions that aggravate the humanitarian catastrophe of the Palestinians. We talked about the absolute security in the region from the point of view of the situation in Afghanistan. Almost all SCO members are stepping up work with Kabul on a bilateral basis, and we are all united in the importance of effectively contributing to the reconstruction of this country, its sustainable development as an independent, neutral, peaceful state, free from terrorism and drugs. It was particularly emphasized that it is necessary to stimulate the process of national accord, ensuring ethnic and political inclusiveness in government structures. We discussed the preparation of documents to be submitted to the Leaders' Summit. Our approaches to cooperation within the SCO, agreed positions on topical issues of the global and regional agenda, will be traditionally fixed in the Tianjin Declaration. The general vision of the long-term guidelines and the further evolution of the association, taking into account the accumulated experience of the ongoing modernization process, is supposed to be reflected in the SCO development strategy until the 2035 year. It is in this 2025 year that the previous 10-year strategy of the SCO expires, which was approved at the summit in Ufa in the 2015 year. We consider as one of the most important political documents being prepared the Statement of the Leaders, in connection with the 80th anniversary of the end of the Second World War and the formation of the UN. In the economic dimension, a whole series of projects is also being prepared on issues such as artificial intelligence, green industry, investment cooperation, and the digital economy. The decision of the leaders on these issues, which I have just mentioned, will lay the foundation for effective preparations for the meeting of the Council of Heads of Government of the SCO member states, which will be held on November 17-18 in Moscow under the Russian chairmanship. So I think we did a very useful job today. Once again, I want to express my gratitude to our Chinese friends, and I am ready to answer your questions.
Sergey Viktorovich, good evening. We would like to ask you to comment on Trump's statement on Ukraine yesterday. Are we ready, after what was said yesterday from Washington, to continue the dialogue with the United States on the normalization of bilateral relations and on the settlement of the Ukrainian conflict? And if I may, one more question in addition. How do we assess the threat of imposing 100% duties on our trading counterparties from the point of view of Russia's foreign economic interests? And maybe you have succeeded in this.
But this, in my opinion, is the same question, because the statement was just about 100% in general. We never build our line to the detriment of national interests, to the detriment of ensuring the security of the country. And special military operations are aimed at exactly that. eliminate at the root, in the bud, those threats that the North Atlantic Alliance has been creating for decades, not for one day, not for 1 year, but for decades right on our borders, and Russia has warned many times. The president devoted countless speeches and statements to this problem, and, unfortunately, he was not heard. But, apparently, this only confirms what President Putin recently said in an interview with Pavel Zarubin about how his and our general perception of relations with the West has evolved, when at first it seemed that it was worth removing ideological differences and everything would be fine. And then it turned out that it wasn't about ideology, that the West had never, regardless of what ideology was practiced in the Russian Empire, in the Soviet Union, in post-Soviet Russia, been driven by only one geopolitical deterrence, suppression, or even direct military destruction of Russia, as has happened more than once in history. Therefore, of course, as Dmitry Peskov said, we want to understand what is behind this statement. There were 50 days before, and there were 24 hours, and there were 100 days. We have been through all this and really want to understand what motivates the President of the United States. It is clear that he is under enormous, I would say indecent pressure from the European Union and the current NATO leadership, who unceremoniously support Zelensky's demands to continue pumping him with modern, including offensive weapons, at the expense of more and more damage to taxpayers in Western countries. Therefore, you know, we have such a proverb, not to dig another hole, but that the sanctions that the European Union has now imposed, and that are being prepared again in Brussels, and the United States is trying to tighten this sanctions funnel. But President Trump explained very specifically that Europe will pay for everything for this. All of this, of course, has already caused very serious damage to the European economy. Sound and objective European analysts, economists, and political scientists recognize that the damage is primarily caused by the author of this sanctions war. We have also announced an unprecedented number of sanctions against us. Coping. I have no doubt that we will manage. This conclusion is also based on an assessment, on the analysis of independent, including many Western economists and politicians. Therefore, as for yes, our trading counterparties, they hear what was said, but they can hardly predict their actions now. They have obligations, international obligations, and knowing these partners of ours, I don't see how they can abandon their independent policy, the policy of compliance, agreements reached both through bilateral channels and in multilateral formats.
Sergey Viktorovich, could you share the details of the bilateral meeting with Xi Jinping? What kind of message did you convey to the leader of China from President Putin? And a question about the SCO. Which states are currently expressing their interests in joining the organization, and which of its initiatives could be useful to reduce the risks of the proliferation of geopolitical crises in which it is already? Once again, here is the second part. Which organizations, which countries express interest in joining the SCO, and which initiatives could be useful these days, given the risks of growing geopolitical crises?
As for the conversation of the SCO foreign ministers with President Xi Jinping and the subsequent conversation with the Russian delegation, they discussed fundamental issues of the development of the Shanghai Organization, the initiatives of the Chinese presidency, which are already well known. They were all announced. And at the bilateral meeting, we discussed our coordination in the foreign policy direction, in accordance with the fundamental strategic guidelines that were previously agreed upon by President Putin and President Xi Jinping. I'm sure you understand that we won't go into details. As for those wishing to join the SCO, today it was decided that the status of a partner of the Shanghai Organization should be granted to the Lao People's Democratic Republic. As I have already said, most of these willing countries will participate in the new format, which will take place immediately after the SCO summit on the 1st of September. This format is called the SCO Plus. About 30 countries and multilateral organizations will participate in it. But as for the challenges and risks, I don't want to state in detail now what everyone knows well, and again state our well-known position on how we are building our actions in areas that threaten our security and our other interests. This is all well known.
Sergey Viktorovich, good evening. I would like to ask about the regional security system. This was one of the goals of the creation of the SCO, but according to the results of today's negotiations, was it possible to be fully ready to conduct counterterrorism or peacekeeping operations?
If you noticed, I touched on this topic in my introductory speech. Now there is a SCO Regional Anti-Terrorist Center, which has been actively working. But recently it has been deemed expedient to expand the mandate of the structure, which will be responsible for new challenges and threats, given the close connection of terrorism with organized crime, especially drug trafficking. It was decided to create a universal SCO center in Tashkent on the basis of the current Regional Anti-Terrorist Center. To combat new at the same time, the SCO Anti-Drug Center is being created in Dushanbe, which will be bound by a special agreement. Procedures for interaction with the Center for Combating New Challenges and Threats. And a structure aimed at combating organized crime will be formed in Bishkek. After the reform, these three mechanisms will create additional opportunities to effectively suppress terrorist threats. Threats related to illegal emigration, which also very often result in extremist and terrorist activities. So I hope our presidents will approve this reform.
Good afternoon, Sergey Viktorovich. Earlier today, on the sidelines of Smithshaw, you held a meeting with Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araki. Was Russia's proposal to export excess enriched uranium from Iran and practical ways to implement this proposal discussed during today's meeting? Thank you.
Realistic approaches were discussed to ensure a solution that would be achieved through peaceful political and diplomatic means, while respecting the decisions that were taken in the Islamic Republic of Iran a long time ago. Namely, Tehran's official refusal to possess nuclear weapons. No one has ever presented any evidence to the contrary, including inspectors of the International Atomic Energy Agency. And the second most important principle is not to infringe on the legitimate rights of Iran, as well as all other non-nuclear members of the IAEA and the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, with regard to the possibility of enriching uranium for energy purposes. These are the principles, but we will continue to discuss with our friends how specific possible moves in this regard are considered. What negotiating technical possibilities exist here? In continuation of the Iranian topic was the issue of providing practical assistance to Iran, restoring the destroyed infrastructure by Israeli-American strikes discussed by us or during bilateral meetings. The Iranian side has not made such requests. Sergey Viktorovich, after meeting with you in Bikini Van, he said that China, together with Russia, are ready to take the SCO to a new level. What level are we talking about? About going up endlessly. Thank you.
Sergey Viktorovich, you said that Moscow wants to understand where Trump's statements are coming from. And just before Trump, a Senator Lindsey Graham spoke about it in about the same terms that Russia, or rather Brazil, China and India, are playing into Putin's hands. If you have already said that Moscow has no particular concerns about partners, but I would like to ask if the SCO or the BRICS have any potential for joint action on, well, such a threat.
But since Washington has made specific threats against BRICS, that BRICS should be fought. That BRICS undermines the interests of the United States. But to be fair, earlier President Trump stated a slightly different point of view. He bluntly said that the actions taken by the Biden administration, using the dollar as a weapon, caused irreparable damage to the authority of this world reserve currency. And I am sure that he understands the validity of that assessment, and that, in response to the outrages of the previous administration, both the BRICS, the community of Latin American and Caribbean countries, and many others are looking for alternative ways of settlements that would not be tied to dollars, thereby being insured against Washington's arbitrariness. And this process can no longer be stopped, and there are statistics about how the dollar's share in world trade and in world financial calculations looks like now. It's not because we wanted to run away from the dollar. President Putin has stressed this more than once. They decided to use this dollar to punish those whose behavior seems to Americans to be inconsistent with the very infamous rules on which they want to keep the whole world order. But if we talk seriously about concerns, our profession is not to be afraid. Our profession is to seek to take into account Russian interests, to work openly, honestly on the basis of international law, on the basis of agreed principles, otherwise a self-respecting, strong, independent power cannot behave. And we have, I want to stress this again, every reason to believe that the BRICS member states are also sovereign and value this state of their own in the world system.
The organizers are that it starts already in the next event, so we have 2 final questions. Please, news.
Nikolay Ivanov mit Izvestia Sergey Viktorovich. The American media claim that the United States is now literally forcing its allies Japan and Australia to decide how they will help Taiwan in the event of a conflict. In parallel, the states and allies of 18 states begin the largest exercises in Australia. Tens of thousands of military personnel are involved there. What do you think is the reason for such a new round of tension in the region? But it is not a new round, it may be a new phase of the very round that began many years ago, when the United States put forward the idea of developing and implementing the so-called Indo-Pacific strategies. Meaning by this Indo-Pacific, meaning the Asia-Pacific region, which has been called so all its life, and I've never suffered from it. But the Indo-Pacific strategies, they symbolized the desire of NATO countries to promote their infrastructure to the Far East. In the region of Southeast Asia, Northeast Asia, to create alliances with nuclear stuffing, like the alliance, AUKUS, the United States. Britain and Australia, like the Troika of the United States, South Korea and Japan. Which is increasingly it conducts more and more large-scale exercises with a nuclear component too, but also many others. The so-called Indo-Pacific Quartet, patronized by the United States of New Zealand, Australia, Japan, South Korea. And all this is accompanied by the advancement of NATO's infrastructure to the east, including in such dangerous forms. as the transfer of medium and shorter-range missiles to the Philippines, which are ground-based, which were previously prohibited by the Russian-American Treaty. This very, very serious weapon will appear for the first time in Southeast Asia. It is also moving to Europe, including Germany. Therefore, the whole process reflects the aggressive advance of NATO to the east. They wanted to absorb Ukraine, they stumbled, but they continue to pretend that they will definitely bring the matter to an end. And in parallel with the way they use Ukraine as the tip of their blows against Russia, although less and less noticeable, they are moving east in parallel. Therefore, their desire is to ensure NATO control over the security situation on the entire Eurasian continent. Instead of constructive alternatives that we are promoting, the People's Republic of China, our other allies, like-minded people to create, as I have already said, an open, equal and inclusive Eurasian security architecture involving all, without exception, the continental countries of Eurasia.
И предусматривающий участие всех без исключения континентальных стран Евразии.
Well, specifically about Taiwan. You know, speculation of provocations on the Taiwanese topic is becoming more and more, for example, here not so long ago. When one of the journalists drew the attention of President Macron to it, he said something like the following: NATO will not interfere in Asian affairs if China takes care. That the Korean People's Republic, the Democratic Republic, did not interfere in the affairs of Europe. How do you like it? And if Russia is allowed by the same Macron to take control of part of Ukraine, then what can happen to Taiwan? This is a frankly provocative statement. The West continues to assure the People's Republic of China that it follows the position and principle of one Taiwan, but at the same time immediately adds, however, the status quo cannot be touched. And we see the status quo. The status quo means that the West communicates with Taiwan as an independent state, arms it, and emphasizes other attributes of independence in every possible way. I thank the permanent representative of Ukraine to the UN. It's you. Oh, I thought you were imagining. Nikita Korzun, in the company of NTV, Ukraine at the UN, Kislitsa said that the Snoggle format of negotiations has almost exhausted itself. Is this a way of trading? Maybe a way to bring the meeting of President Vladimir Putin with Zelensky closer? Or is the Istanbul format on pause again? But he is no longer a permanent representative of the Prion. He is, in my opinion, a deputy minister even now. Although, of course, he made a reputation for himself as an ambassador to the United Nations. Zelensky also said that the Istanbul format is not serious. In my opinion, someone else from his team made similar statements. And the argument was very simple, that they didn't discuss anything except humanitarian issues. The exchange of prisoners, the return of the bodies of the dead, the return of wounded soldiers. But if they believe that this format has exhausted itself, this once again confirms their disregard for their own citizens. Just as they were handed over to them a long time ago, they do not want to transfer the bodies to relatives in order to save money. Just like they shot down our plane, which was delivering prisoners for exchange some time ago. And this, in general, is the face of the Ukrainian regime. But we must not forget that they are lying, because in addition to humanitarian issues, which of course are important, these issues concern people and their relatives and friends, but in addition to these humanitarian issues, after all, at the second round of these negotiations, our delegation handed over a draft agreement, a draft that took the form of a memorandum. And the Ukrainians handed over their draft memorandum. Yes, they are the opposite. We discussed at the request of the Americans with them at the expert level, as we see the denouement. The answer was very simple. Despite the diametrically opposite positions, in April of the 22nd year in Istanbul, it was possible to agree on a denouement, not just on a ceasefire, but on a settlement, on the principles of settlement that were proposed by Ukraine. And that satisfied the Russian Federation. The document was initialed. There was an agreement to start preparing a legal document, a contract, but then the British, probably with the consent of the United States, forbade Ukrainians to sign this document. This is just as an example of the fact that with all the positions that do not coincide, directly contradicting each other, there is always an opportunity for conversation. But if they say that the format has been exhausted, it means that, in addition to not caring about their citizens, there is also an unwillingness to negotiate. Probably, the Macrons, Starmers, Ursels, von der Leyens and other scoundrels forbid them to do this again. When all these characters simply demand with one voice to urgently pump up Ukraine with additional offensive weapons, there is a German representative of some kind of collective headquarters at the Ministry of Defense to assist Ukraine, he says bluntly. It is necessary to give it the most long-range missiles and types of weapons, so that it can strike on the territory of Russia deep into the territory of Russia. And here you see they say how. No negotiations, it's clear now. An immediate ceasefire, and then negotiations. But a ceasefire without conditions. Macron, on the other hand, said directly a few months ago, when this thesis first appeared, that this does not mean stopping the supply of weapons to Ukraine. So they want us to stop our offensive, and to give Ukraine and its sponsors an opportunity to take a break and arm themselves again. The same logic, the same approach, as they used when they signed the Minsk agreements, using these 7-year efforts to implement them, in order to militarize Ukraine in full. Well, you know, and Mers recently said, NATO is obliged to provide Ukraine with the strongest possible military position, so that negotiations can begin. In other words, no one is hiding anything. Stop firing. We'll pump her up and everything will be fine. And everything will be fine. As for the fact that our American colleagues, they know our position perfectly well. We told them about the exhaustion of the format. It is not exhausted. They tried to pretend that the level of our delegation was not suitable. Well, here is the level of the Ukrainian delegation. It will change now. The former defense minister of the Lavrov family is going to the United States as an ambassador. And you understand that the third round of negotiations, which we proposed to start in the week of June 22nd, is still not mentioned in any Ukrainian statements, in any advice given to them by their Western curators. And now the negotiator has left, and if these explanations of ours, which we have repeatedly passed on to our American colleagues, including at my meetings on the sidelines of events, are lost, if they are simply ignored or not reported to President Trump. It is difficult to judge what is behind this, but to say that there is no progress, and therefore it would take 50 days. If the Ukrainian side agreed to name the date of the third round in the week from the 22nd of June, maybe there are already 30 days left. But this, of course, does not please us, but we are acting according to the plan approved by the President, and this plan is to guarantee the legitimate interests of the Russian Federations in the field of security, and to guarantee the rights of Russians and Russian speakers who remain to live in Ukraine contrary to all norms of international law that prohibit discrimination based on national, ethnic, linguistic, or religious principle. Thank you.